I am beyond excited to be talking to the man, Kelly Jordon, today. Kelly Jordon is a professional bass fisherman on the Bass Pro Tour, and he's a friend of mine. Kelly, how are you doing, dude?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. We are going to be doing episode 15. Episode 15, we've come so far. Are you ready to do this, Kelly?
Let's do it.
This isn't another fishing podcast. This is another fishing podcast.
I have been filming Major League Fishing events for, I think the first one. When was the first one, Kelly? The first one was 2010, right?
On Amistad. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was on Amistad. I got hooked in the arm by KVD, so that was momentous for me. I'll never forget that. But so we've been doing these tournaments for a very long time. As a guy that's eaten up with tournaments, and particularly bass fishing tournaments, it's been an awesome ride. But I'm excited to talk to you because I want to get your perspective throughout this whole Major League Fishing journey. Like how it started. You are an angler as far as knowing the ins and outs of how Major League Fishing started and then how the Bass Pro Tour started. So I thought it'd be exciting to talk to you about that, but also just the fact that this last tournament you were kicking ass, and I want to go through that. Like there's a ton of stuff I want to talk to you about, but I know we don't have forever. But so I guess first things first, we'll get to those topics, but tell me how you got into fishing, number one, and then how you got into tournament fishing. How did you make that leap?
Well, that's a great question. Nobody in my family is a fisher person. I was alone, I guess, on that spectrum for whatever reason. When I was a kid, when I saw water, I wanted to be by it. I wanted to go fishing. I think my granddad took me to a trout farm in North Carolina when I was about 3 years old. And I think I caught my first fish on a piece of colored popcorn on a cane pole, and it was this rainbow trout out of a trout pond. So I guess that started it there. And ever since then, I have fished, always wanted to fish. I would skip out of class, get out of anything else I was doing, or if I had a chore, I would hurry up and do it fast so I could go fishing. And I was fortunate enough to grow up in Texas and had a lot of water around, golf courses, creeks, stuff like that. And I had a bunch of friends that liked to fish as well. So we would always go run down the creeks with Zebco 33s and fish in the little creeks and catch a little bitty bass, little bitty perch, catfish, limb lines, what have you. Then I guess when I got into junior high, I had a guy lived down the road from us in Waco, Texas. I moved there from Austin when I was about, I think, 13 or 14. And neighbors was good friends of ours, and they said, hey, can you take this kid fishing? He likes to fish. And the guy finally said, okay, fine, I'll take him fishing. And this guy was a diehard bass fisherman. I was anything that'll bite's good for me from that point on. Well, he showed me the ins and outs of bass fishing. He had I think a 16-foot bass boat with a 90 horsepower motor, which was pretty big back then. And I saw the light there and said, this is what I like to do, is bass fish. So, hey, that was the start of my focus on bass fishing. And then from there, I just always fished, had buddies with boats and got to fish with them, fished some Tuesday night tournaments, with some of these veteran guys that I knew from around the neighborhood that would take me fishing. I was the backseater, of course, and went from there, and then just the love for that continued. Fished all I could, and always, read all the magazines, watched all the shows, Bill Dance, you name it, Roland Martin.
We're kind of like similar age. I think you might be just a tad older, Kelly. But did you watch like the ESPN Outdoors block in the morning? I was so I lived out in California when I was, in my formative years.
Gotcha, wonder years.
Yeah. And I would get up at 5 a.m. to watch the ESPN Outdoors block with Tom Mann Outdoors. Yeah. Remember that show?
Absolutely.
Tom Mann? I was addicted to that. And then
They had TNN too, if you remember that, the Nashville Network. They had all their other fishing shows. So
that's right. So and so that's when I learned about the Bassmasters, and on the Nashville Network on Sundays, like it was on at like in the afternoon. Was it around like maybe it was noon or something like that?
Right.
And dude, I gotta tell you, I became addicted to that show, and that show is what got me into tournament fishing and following tournament fishing, and then actually wanting to be a tournament bass fisherman. So did you have a similar? Was that kind of what happened with you?
Absolutely. I knew all the pros, from the Rick Clunns, the Jimmy Houstons, the Hank Parkers, on down the line. There's tons of them. Denny Brower, Guido Hibden, some of my early heroes. Jay Ellis,
Absolutely.
and many others, and watched them as I was, high school age, just trying to figure out how to fish. And I just dreamed of one day being able to compete and seeing if I could make it. And that's, I guess it's kind of funny because I think every sport is the same way. Anybody who has succeeded in any sport or, from Major League, baseball to NFL, whatever, they probably always had a dream of being there, and they worked real hard and then had some success and got there. And it's like plenty of people dream, and I'm one of the few that are lucky enough to have made it, and I get to do that for a living, and I'll never take that for granted. And, wake up with a big smile on my face every day because of that.
So how did you make that? How did you make that leap? So what happened when you were You're eating up with fishing. You're watching the programs. You're reading all the magazines. Reading everything you could. And then what was like the catalyst that made you go, okay, I can actually do this for a living? What made you go, I can do this, I'm going to pursue it? And then what was the moment where it actually sent you over like, oh, I'm doing this for a living?
Yes. So how that happened was I fished team tournaments around Texas. I've tried to figure out how to go pro, fish some kind of pro tournaments, but I didn't have a boat to do that with. Our family had an old fishing ski with walk-through windshields and a little bitty front deck with a troll motor on the front. And so I fished some local tournaments, started by myself, and I didn't know anybody that fished in the area I lived in East Texas at that time. And so I just showed up and fished, and I wanted to fish a little East Texas team circuit. And the first tournament was on Lake Fork. It was called the Northeast Texas Region of Anglers Choice Team Tournaments. And the first one was on Lake Fork. I think that was 1993 or 4. I can't remember. Anyway, I won the tournament out of a fish and ski. And I'm a 21-year-old kid nobody's ever seen. And I didn't know anybody there either. And they're like, who is this kid that just won this tournament in fish and ski with walk-through windshields?
Nice.
And hey, got fortunate, caught a couple big ones that day, and that was my first tournament I ever fished. That was like out of my own boat. So then I got to know some of the guys in the area, and it's kind of fun networking. Everybody's a fisherman. Once you break the ice, everybody likes to talk to each other. So I met some great people. Turned out I had a couple guys who were team tournament partners, and fished a few years with that. And then one of my team partners and I won a year-end championship. Big year-end championship. First place was a brand new bass boat.
There you go.
That is how I got my first bass boat. My team partner said, hey, look, you take it. You do what you want to do. Go pro. See what you can do. Okay. And then when you sell it, we'll split it later. And so that was my break to where I had a boat to go compete. And so I entered some local pro tournaments and got on the waiting list for Bass Special Invitationals at that time. And that was how I got my start, because I couldn't afford a boat, so I won one in a tournament. So hey, that is how I got my start.
So you got your start that way, but that only tells like one part of the story, as far as like, okay, yeah, you can now, like, first of all, talk about the entry fees and the expenses of traveling, because you're essentially, and I see this all the time, you kind of live the lifestyle of a semi-truck driver.
Yeah, that's true.
In many ways, there's so much driving that is a part of it, so the expenses of, first of all, a tow vehicle, the gas to pull the tow vehicle in the boat, lodging, all the expenses. How did you juggle that? Like, how difficult was that in the beginning?
Okay, so I entered some was Angler's Choice Pro-Ams in Texas back then, and then I got on the waiting list for some Bassmaster Invitationals. I had a job. I was going to school. I was actually going to graduate school at the time, University of Texas in Arlington, Texas, the branch up there. And I was a manager at a restaurant at night. And so I had a little bit of money, but not much. And then so I entered those Angler's Choice Pro-Am tournaments. The very first one was in February of, I think, 96. Yeah. And the very first one, and I got second place in that and won a boat. So I sold that boat, and that was a little bit of in the war chest over here.
Got it.
That helped a lot, to kind of like, hey. So that was another blessing. I mean, heck, I didn't win, but I got a first and second place was a boat. So I think I sold it for maybe $17,000, something like that, which was a lot of money back then. But it was like a 17-footer with a 150 on the back. I remember that. But and through fishing that little Texas circuit, I didn't fish a lot of events, so there wasn't that big of a monumental output of time. Maybe 4 or 5 pro events, each one a week long. During that time, I met Mark Pack, a dear friend of mine who passed away this January from COVID, by the way, but terrible thing. But anyway, met him through that. I'd already kind of met him at Lake Fork. He was one of my heroes, and he came up to me and talked to me because I had some success. And he said, hey, why don't you come guide for me on Lake Fork? So that's how I would never have known how to start guiding, get clients, whatever. So I did. I moved to Lake Fork, started guiding for Mark Pack. He got me the trips, and I started fishing pro. Now I'm fishing every day. Got a little bit in the war chest, so as far as following through, learning curve was really steep, but that's how I got my start, and that's how I paid the bills, was through my guiding, and I guided from 96 all the way to about 2003, so about 7 years full time. So when I wasn't on the road, I was fishing every day, guiding people on Lake Fork.
So you're a perfect example of your case was you really had to, and I think this is really for everybody that early on has to try to make a go at this, is that you busted your hump to make it happen, and you had things just kind of fall into place, which if you got my
brakes, you got to have your brakes. I think that's true in every sport too, but I got my brakes, no doubt.
And I think, you just put yourself in the position and those breaks will happen. At least that's the experience that I've kind of seen just in my videography career and doing on camera stuff and just putting yourself out there, good things are going to happen to you, But what do you think? You hear sometimes, there's anglers that have they've had a silver spoon in their mouth. They've gotten to this point because they've had a wealthy family or something. How common do you think that is? Is that? When I hear that, I kind of know better because, sure, those anglers I'm sure are out there. But do you think that's a criticism that's not as common as maybe people think it is?
When anglers have success, there's always people try to knock them down, no matter what. There's always, the haters, people are jealous, people, whatever. Whether or not that is true of some anglers, I do know a few that have, pretty wealthy families. But that doesn't make them a good fisherman or a very competitive angler. It just is what it is. That's, trying to diminish from anybody who had an easier shot at that and didn't have to guide for 7 years or live out of the back of their truck. Hey, more power to them. Same place, they're fishing their butt off, they're trying to get it done, and guess what? To compete at the level that we fish now, you have to it is 110% all the time, and you can still get swatted out of the park like crazy. The competition is so tough. But, who cares, man? They're all the same.
Yeah.
You got to fish. You got to put your pants on one leg at a time. Everybody's got to go out there and catch them. And if you don't have the determination, the drive, and dedication to get hardly any sleep and be on the road for, weeks at a time, and you sacrifice time with the family. And, you look back at, when I was guiding in full time and fishing, man, I didn't get to go hang out with the guys. It was 24/7 work, but I loved it, so it didn't feel like work. And that doesn't matter if you got a silver spoon or not. If you still have to be able to do that to make this work, because it is such a tough sport to exceed in.
Yeah, it really is. And I think now that I'm more enmeshed into the sport than I've ever been, covering so many of these Bass Pro Tour events, that, I've heard those criticisms before, and I've just been around it in this sport more now, where I see guys that I'm seeing guys that really didn't have much that are doing very, very well, and
Yes,
and it's kind of blowing that whole thing out of the water, that whole idea. And sure, this is a wealthy country. If you can't, of course, there's going to be guys that come from a better, they have more money or something. But first of all, that doesn't mean they're bad guys, and it doesn't mean that they aren't incredibly talented fishermen. So I've kind of just swept that away. Like I just don't, you know what I mean? Like I hear that, and now it's more like these guys are, the people that say those things are just, I think, more jealous than anything.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate. Like I said, I mean, even if it is true, I'm sitting there trying to think anybody I know that was extremely wealthy. I can only think of one really that I know of, but you wouldn't really know it. Hey, it's America, man. Living the dream.
That's right. You're doing it, man. You're living the dream, Kelly.
And here's the other deal. If you had a lot of money and you were really smart, you probably would not be a pro fisherman. So.
I've said this many times. I love this sport. I love this sport.
It is hard.
People ask me, I don't know, like how I can do it, like how I can stand in the back of a boat and hold a camera on my shoulder. It's because I love the sport of bass fishing. I equate it to if you were a fan of baseball, right, or a fan of golf, and you're right. Can you hear my dog in the background? I got this little Chihuahua that's decided to start barking.
It's great.
I think it's because she's hearing me, speaking so loudly. This is my podcasting voice. But no, it's just like, what was I talking about? So it's basically like if you're a fan of baseball, fan of golf, and you're right there in the action. I mean, closer than any sport. Like closer than any sport. You're right there in the action. You're in the freaking boat with the. I have a hard time calling fishermen athletes. I'm sorry, Kelly. Okay, but I'm just gonna say you're in the boat. Yeah. What's that? You've been working out?
No, I just.
Okay. So, by the way, too, if you see me using the mouse here, that's me switching camera angles. I'm super.
Okay, gotcha.
I'm very talented here. So I'm in the action. As a fan of the sport, I'm like immersed in it. I love being on the water. I love being outside. I love just like seeing how the anglers are thinking, because there's a lot of stuff that people aren't able to see, that doesn't make the live show or doesn't make the edited show. So I'm right there, and I'm just like picking up on this stuff. I'm like, wow, and I see some stuff that happens between anglers that doesn't make it. I'm like, that's interesting. Of course, I keep all that stuff to myself, But yeah. I love that as a fan of the sport. Is it feel like torture sometimes that the fishing's really slow and I got to have this heavy camera and it's hot? Yes, but I will say it still beats the butt off of working in an office.
And that's the thing, the freedom that you and I know from what we do, and it is a choice, and there's a lot of sacrifices that have been made to do what we do, but not many people get to see the world that we see and travel like we do. And like I said, I'll never take that for granted. That's my favorite thing about it. I have been coast to coast, north to south, east, anywhere you've been and spent time in different communities, met a lot of great people from coast to coast, seen a lot of great things and incredible weather and incredible nature, incredible water, incredible fishing. And so what you're saying is, how you can carry the camera is the same thing that I got is, it's a passion for the sport, man. And that's true of any, hopefully everybody has a passion they can follow it like we have. It's always kind of cracked me up when people say, how, I could never, back when we had co-anglers or boat official or marshals that were before boat officials, who would sit on the back deck of the boat and watch you fish all day without fishing. And I've heard that comment from many people that say, man, I could never do that. Let me tell you what, I'm the first guy that would sign up to do that. And I have done that. Some of our events that they had different days, or maybe I was eliminated, I would help with the camera boat, or I would be an on-the-water correspondent, or drive a camera boat around. And I sat on a troll motor all day, never said a word for the whole week. And this is every day of a couple events that I did, and got to watch all the same guys who are friends of mine fish. Never a dull moment. It was, watched them for hours and hours and hours and never got old. And again, that's just passion for the sport. We love it. And like I said, it's if you don't have that either, it'd be hard to make a living at this sport either. You just have to live it and breathe it, and that's what we do.
What are your thoughts? I had a boss in well, maybe I shouldn't say my first job out of college. I'll put it this way: I had a boss that said, I remember I was full of piss and vinegar in my 20s, and he said, bass fishing will never be like NASCAR. It's never going to be a mainstream sport. And I got all wound up, and I basically, we got in an argument, and I walked out of his office. Kind of and I remember going back to my cubicle and telling one of my coworkers that I think I just got fired. Luckily I didn't, but my point is that to him I was saying there's so much passion behind fishing that you can't, it's particularly bass fishing, you can't make that judgment that it'll never be bigger than NASCAR. It'll never be a mainstream sport, because I've always I've always thought that you could see how much passion there is in this sport, and you could see how much potential there is, because look at how much money that is spent for people to do what we love to do, like bass fish, right? Tournament fish, the boats that it takes to do it, the tow vehicle, all the rods, all the lures. There isn't a sport that comes close to and granted, you don't need all those things to enjoy fishing, but when someone gets eaten up with bass fishing, man, they pour a ton of money into it, more than I would argue any other sport, any other mainstream sport. So I've contended that that's a good indicator that this thing could be much bigger than we think maybe it can be. And so with Major League Fishing, and I think Major League Fishing is the best so far currently where we are in the sport of bass fishing. I think it's the best shot. And granted, will there be some tweaks and whatnot? Sure. But to me, it's the best step in the right direction to get to that mainstream goal, if that's what we're going for here. I just think I've filmed things in during Major League Fishing events that I'm like, that right there, that's like, anybody can understand that. You don't even have to be a fisherman to understand that that's exciting. And I'm just like, okay, this is more what we're talking about here. I feel like things were stagnant. Let's say before Major League Fishing, it was just, there was cool things being done. I don't want to just crap all over what was happening before Major League Fishing. But I think it kind of, everybody got kind of like just comfortable, and things got stagnant. And Major League Fishing comes along with the score tracker, and everybody knows. I remember that first tournament going, oh my God. Like, I was way more engaged. I was like, just as a camera guy in the back going, oh my God, that angler who I don't even see on another part of the lake is like starting to come up. There's all these different storylines happening. I'm like, this, is the deal. I think you probably feel pretty similar. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, that's the basis behind Major League Fishing is to make our sport, which we love so much and the passion, we know how exciting it can be and how awesome it is, and be able to have it in a format that would engage casual fishermen and maybe not even people that fish, sports fans in general, or my grandmother or somebody like that. Just, it's got to be compelling. You got to know what the score is. It's got to be easy to understand what's going on. It's got to be easy to understand how you win, how you get ahead. You get to see lead changes. You get to see the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. That's what people want to watch. And it's engaging because it moves very fast. It's very fast paced, and everybody knows, including the anglers, so you get their reaction. I always, in our first couple of years, people would ask me just, what we're talking about. Hey, man, how's that different with the score tracker? And I said, imagine being fishing on a lake in a tournament. Everyone has a camera in their boat, including me. And they put a camera in your face and they say, score tracker update. Denny Brower leading with 1,752,000 pounds. Second place, Kevin Van Dam with 1,553 pounds on down the line. And Kelly Jordon, you're in last place with 7 pounds, 5 ounces. How do you feel right now?
Right.
And
right.
It's just like, and you feel it's like a giant anvil on your back when you know what that score tracker is. I said, that's what it's, if you can think about that, there's nowhere to hide. And the motivation and everybody going so fast through, it's just, you got to have that in there. And we all thrive on that. It's a pressure cooker, man. Nothing like it. I've never been so tired after a day of competition in my life after our first few times with the score tracker and stuff, because your heart rate must be 150 beats a minute for 7 hours straight. It's crazy. And when we, like you were saying, after our first event, everyone there was like, oh my gosh, what have we got here? This is unbelievable. So anyway, and it was thought about for a long time. Again, the basis is for what it is to make it, like I said, easily understandable, easy to know what the score is, how you win, and track what's going on, and then makes it compelling sport. And that's what people like to watch, is sport.
So I thought it was pretty remarkable, and I'm not here to listen. I was raised on BASS, and I was raised on Bassmaster, and I honestly don't have any time for people that are just, I don't know, slinging mud. It's like, to me, it's like, hey, let's just, with Major League Fishing, let's let the product speak for itself, okay? It's like, there's no need to go wrestling in the mud with, it's just, they're doing their thing. Major League Fishing's doing what we're doing. So I will say, it was remarkable to me when the Bass Pro Tour started, and there was a mass exodus. I've talked about this before, a mass exodus of people from BASS to Major League Fishing. And I'm sure there's a lot of factors behind that, okay? But I would say, maybe this is, that to me is an indicator that there's something off, okay? Now, about the previous the other organization. And now I don't know that for a fact, but I'm just saying, for everybody, like BASS, it was like, we all started. That was like how so many of us got into bass fishing. It had the name, and for the top dogs to go, nah, even guys that had won classics and maybe could have won the all-time like Van Dam, for instance, he had won 4 classics. He's tied with Clunn. He could have stayed and beat Clunn and had the all-time number of class. I actually asked Van Dam about that. He's like, I don't even care about that stuff, which I was kind of surprised, to be honest. But for everybody to go over to a new tour to really take a gamble, that, I'm sorry, but I can't help but think, okay, there's something wrong over there. Now, you don't need to talk about that, but I get kind of frustrated when I hear these people talk about, like, oh, the bass, how can they? It's like they're talking about a BASS that existed in the 80s or that doesn't even exist anymore. The ownership is different. Everything's different, guys. And sorry, I went on a rant there. Any thoughts on that? I was blown away by the mass exodus that occurred.
Yes, the Bass brand is strongest, forever. We all grew up living and breathing bass. And then FLW came along. You remember that? That kind of was the first kind of move around. And then, and that actually helped the sport a lot. If you remember, it brought a lot of new blood, new sponsors into the sport. It was very helpful, and it helped raise the tide a little bit. Actually, a lot, I would assume, because after that, ESPN bought Bass, and then we had, we used to have the majors, the E50s. I mean, it was the golden age of that organization, that brand. And like I said, it is a brand. It's a hallowed brand. I mean, we're all the same. We all grew up fishing that. All of us did. Times change. And it is what it is. There's a lot of backstory. There's no hatred, in there on my behalf whatsoever. I get it. People don't like change. And most people have taken it pretty well, but some people are pretty bitter about it. And I just really hate that. I have a lot of friends that are employed over there. Dave Mercer is one of my best friends.
I hear you.
Dear friend.
And I've done a ton of work with Zona.
He's still my dear friend.
Yeah. No, I get it. That's what I'm saying. It's not.
There's a company, and then there's personal, and like I said, I don't like. It bothers me when the professional and the personal gets blurred in some places. That's the only thing I have a problem with. Other than that, hey, it's a game, it's business. People don't like change, but the future that we see through Major League Fishing and just where we're going, it's a great product. It's fantastic for our sport, in our opinion. And, hey, no hatred whatsoever. It just is what it is.
Yeah, I hear you.
There's a lot. Someday there'll be books written about it, and we'll all know the rest of the story. But that's where we got to leave it right now.
That's exactly right. And I know that I was kind of wading into some. I'm just trying to be very honest here. I'm not trying to start a controversy for controversy's sake. But I did. I don't know. There was a book written in the '80s called Bass Wars. Did you ever read that book? It was.
Amazing stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, so when you say there'll be a book written later about all this, I'm sure we can't.
Bass Wars too.
It's I can't talk about. I mean, we can't really go into stuff, But maybe when we're nearly dead, we can talk about about how things.
There's just so many interesting things here and there, and hey, it's changed. It shook the industry. It really messes with some people's things, and when you mess with people's livelihood, or they perceive that you did, you get a lot of kickback, and that has happened. And it's like I said, it's been painful for me a little bit on a personal level with some people that I consider friends, and other friends not so much. They same as me. Hey man, it is what it is. Let's do our job, and then we all at the same time we all love the sport of bass fishing.
It's all right.
And it's like, hey man. We're just people like each other, and we all love to fish.
Yeah,
we just have a different direction. Sorry, that's just where we went. And I wish you all the best. I'd love for y'all wish us the best. That's where we got to leave it.
So tell me how your relationship, how you got involved in Major League Fishing, and tell me some kind of the behind the scenes, the beginning stories of how it evolved, and then how the Bass Pro Tour started. Can you kind of go through that progression and how that happened?
Yeah, so the first catchway release tournament there ever was on the pro level was the Toyota Texas Bass Classic, which I was a founder of. And that was the Professional Anglers Association. The board members at that time, I think Gary Clunn, I can't remember. I think maybe he was president then of the Professional Anglers Association. I know Shaw Grigsby was very involved in it. Denny Brower at the time, Kevin Van Dam, everybody. I had this dream of this tournament on my home lake of Lake Fork, which is a slot limit lake. Could never have a pro tournament there and exhibit how awesome of a lake it was because the limit wouldn't allow you to have that. So met some people, and the one thing led to another. We got the go-ahead. Hey, let's go talk to Parks and Wildlife. Let's figure out how to make this happen. Round and round with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, mainly Phil DeRocher and Dave Terry, together with Gary Klein, myself, Shaw Grigsby, and several others. Just went through how could we possibly have this event. They weren't about to give us a permit to where we could do it and, do something that every other angler could not. That would not have been right in their eyes, and I get it. So that's how we formulated the immediate catchway release. And that's what we did. It wasn't every fish counts, though. It was the biggest 5. They had the Lunker Club at the first one, I'll never forget. Half of the anglers could watch it at all times, and they had the live leaderboard, they called it. I think that's what it was called. And everybody at that event was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. They're just glued to the screen because they saw the real-time updates of the scores, the weights. It was unbelievable. When you're on the water, you could hear the radio going back and forth. Some people said, turn that off. I don't want to hear what other guys are catching. And other people were like, who's in boat 54 again? Because they didn't yell the names out back and forth. And man, it opened the eyes of a lot of people. And we had that going on forever. And that was kind of the start of it. Next thing you know, you have the taking of that format and putting some real thought to it and taking to the next level. And that goes to Gary Clunn and Boyd Duckett. They took that format, Boyd and Gary talking, hey, why don't we have some tournaments like this, fair to do it, but why do we have to have a 5-fish limit? Why can't we just keep on playing and the score would move the whole game instead of just being over and a guy sitting on the bank? Hey, he knows he's not going to get rid of that 7-pounder he's got in there. He says, he's got 35 pounds, all 7-pounders. I mean, what's he going to do? You don't want to burn him up for the next. You know how it's just that's the strategy you got to have with a 5-fish event. And the reason we have a 5-fish event is because most of the country has a 5-fish limit now. It used to be 7.
That's
used
right.
to be 10. And you hear the argument for, hey, 5 fish, 5. Man, it's always been fluid. It was 10 fish. I mean, I think the record stringer of all time was on Lake Eufaula, and it was 10 fish that weighed, 98 pounds or 80. I can't remember the weights, but something like that. 7 fish, something, but I'm sure somebody will know and let us all know. But just an amazing thought. So the next thing you know, the PAA is kind of dissolved already. So that's not there anymore. Well, I'm still good friends with Gary. I know Boyd very well. We get a group of anglers together, and we have this idea to having some events, expo events. A couple things, and got together with some guys, and they had a proposal. Boyd and Gary did,
and roughly what time period was that when that was kind of happening?
Probably 2000, 8 or 9, probably 8, 2008. Yeah, probably so. And so we had a bunch of guys said, yeah, we want to be a part of that. So we had some investors, and that's the shareholders of Major League Fishing, and they're all anglers. Put a little investment, say, hey, let's try to make something happen here with some leadership. We did, and then Boyd went out and Gary and we had our little board deal there and election and stuff, and Boyd was vice president, Gary's president, and I was the treasurer. So that was like the three amigos for a while. And I was the bean counter to sit on the side and pretty much didn't say much. I learned to not say much because those guys are way smarter than I am at the meetings. And I've been to meetings in St. Louis with Anheuser-Busch, and I've been to meetings, trying to get it started. Outdoor Channel became a partner with us, and that's how we got it rolling. We were able to secure that for TV programming for that first event that we had on Amistad, because we sold the concept to them. We never even shot a pilot because it was already a proven format. In my opinion, mostly because the Tour Texas Bass Classic was such an exciting event. Now, we didn't really sell it as much because this was not involved whatsoever or a continuation, although that is where the roots are. That allowed us to go to the next level. And they said, hey, fine, let's try this. Let's see how it does. We said, hey, we can get this many shows out this many days because each day is a day of competition. Totally new concept in a tournament. Wasn't a one, and the rest is history. It worked like a champ, and everybody that was there, it's just like, wow, because we had never had that. That was the first time any of us had ever fished in that format. We had designed it. We knew what it would be like, but we hadn't competed in it yet. And when we did, holy mackerel.
Yeah.
I couldn't even stop to breathe. I was like, wow.
I remember some of the funny things in the beginning. Do you remember the buoys? Remember the buoys?
Yeah.
So if an angler, if you, let's say you found a really good spot, you could drop a buoy, like this big buoy. It was like I mean, it wasn't just a marker buoy. This is like a big buoy. You'd throw it out, and an angler couldn't get within like 50 yards of you or something. Remember that one?
Yeah, because the argument was like, well, what if you get on them and they know that you're sitting right there and they know that it's you catching them, because everybody was so scared to death that you're going to know that hey, they're going to know I'm catching them when I'm catching them. What's to keep them from coming in and fishing on top of me because they know I'm just killing them? Well, there's nothing against that in the rules. They might have known about it too. Well, that's just wrong. We got to protect our fish. And that was that was, like I said, doesn't matter what it is, change is hard. Okay, doesn't matter who you are. So the anglers are thinking, how can I not get poached? How can I not get whatever? That's where that came from. You could throw the buoy and you had it 30 yards, but I think the other thing is you couldn't leave either.
Oh, really?
And I don't think the buoy was ever thrown one time. Not once. Everybody, we got to have that. And it's never been thrown one time, and that's just out of sight, out of mind anymore.
Oh, yeah, that was retired like after the first year. I mean, I didn't see that anymore. Like they had it that first year.
Nobody threw it one time.
You actually threw it one time?
I said nobody threw it one time.
Right.
It was never used one time.
So now, okay, so the progression. So that was, I think we first shot that in 2010, if I'm not mistaken, and then 2011.
Right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it was 2011 when the first shows started airing on Outdoor Channel, and then kind of go through that. So talk about any insider information that you feel comfortable sharing, but that whole process of like tweaking things, just doing the cup events, and then it's been such a success doing the cup events. Let's try to make this into a full-fledged tour. The stress, all of that, like just anything, any wisdom, any experiences that you can share with us through that, like that period, because that's going to be, I mean, in the fishing history books, that's going to be I believe a real pivotal point for this sport.
Yeah, so the success of the Major League Fishing Cups was just through the roof. It was number one in ratings on the Outdoor Channel across all media platforms and all outdoor spaces. After the first, it might have been the first year, but I think after the second year, it was there for sure, and it kept growing like that. And it was the number one programming, number one thing on all outdoor TV. Period. It had the highest numbers, the most. Fans wanted to watch it. If you remember, and this is the thing maybe we're forgetting to remind everybody, they were dark events. No one knew who won the event. And they were filmed the year before, typically, in the fall, and they started airing the following spring during, fishing season and what have you. And then each one event, was, 6 different days. So there's 6, so we had a lot of content for airing as a show. So it really worked out good for cost, expense, doing the shoot, having people on site. It just made sense. And it was very compelling because you had all these cut days and whatever. And people couldn't wait to see it. And they would always debut on Saturday morning. You remember, we're talking about getting up early to watch the block. And then they had a couple re-airs of that show throughout that week. And then the new one always came on the following Saturday morning. And on down the line from that. So that worked just great, and Outdoor Channel loved it as much because that was their own property too, so they didn't have to, pay for it or whatever. So it was like the best thing ever. Sponsors loved it. They're like, hey, check this out. Look at our ratings. They're like, wow, that's really exciting to watch. It's better than watching a guy's bobber go under the next 30 hour block later. The other thing we did was we had an hour block. I think maybe we started with some 30-minute segments at first, and then we would have the hour. Maybe the hour long was on Saturday morning. Can't remember exactly. Maybe there were 30-minute shows kind of following up after that. Another big pivotal piece was, and I don't remember the year, but we decided to go to 2-hour program. It went from a 1-hour show on Saturday morning to a 2-hour show, which is the change, and the thought behind that is it becomes an event. It's like you can sit down and watch a football game.
Right.
You can sit down and watch a baseball game. They're all about 2 hours, 2.5. This is 2 hours of intensity, and you got your commercial deals in there. So that was another pivotal moment when we talked them into letting us try out the 2-hour concept. They're like, okay, let's try that. What do you know? Hey, the ratings grew the entire 2-hour period. I mean, Jim Wilburn just gets all excited. He's our, president and CEO of Major League Fishing, and the whiz of Major League Fishing that's brought us together and got the sponsors involved. Can't say enough great things about Jim Wilburn. But he would tell you all the numbers with a huge smile on his face, all the numbers, all the ratings. And that just progresses to the Bass Pro Tour. We kept thinking about, hey, let's get this bigger. Let's make a tour or whatever. And we worked on that for three years or so. And we had a concept, and we had a lot of different directions that we could go. And there was a lot of roadblocks here and there, and some of our dreams of how maybe we could implement it fell by the wayside. And in one of them at the 9th hour, we thought it was a done deal, and then boom, it's gone. And then we're like, hey, we can't stop our business model. This is, we want to somehow get it going forward. We're just going to have to just go ahead and do it. And that's what we did. And that's how it happened. And it wasn't a fly-by-night deal. It was a long-term plan, and a lot of things were planned, and there was a lot of contingencies, a lot of, dreams, visions of how this could become reality. And when we finally pulled the trigger, we had exhausted every other, avenue that maybe how we could do it. And the focus became clear. This is how we're going to have to do it. And we went forward and did it. And we had, our sponsors back this, our partner, who was Cronky Sports Entertainment now, that bought the Outdoor Channel previously. They believed in it and supported this. And I mean, this is a big step, huge. And we did that. And here we are today.
Yeah, it's a great story.
Everything, we're still here. It's great.
Well, that's the thing too. I thought about that. 2020. I mean, what a terrible year. This isn't exactly a fantastic year either. It's got to be. That's just adding more difficulty. You never know when things like this are going to happen to a business, and obviously I'm not in the organization, but that's a tremendous bump to have to get over. And from everything I could tell, I mean, Major League Fishing seems to be weathering it pretty good, but this has been tough on everybody. Really has.
It's been tough on everybody, not just Major League Fishing, the whole fishing industry, especially tournament organizations, I think, across the board. It's been really hard. They had to cancel all their events. I mean, that's their product. And, and the sponsors, therefore, their contract was not fulfilled, and then, whatever. And then everybody was afraid in the middle of 2022, hey, is this ever going to turn around? Well, when it did, we all know it turned around like a lion.
Yes.
And all just boom. I mean, every back ordered boat that was sitting in a lot, they were all gone. They couldn't even build a new one 6 months out that's still the same way. It's just it's like, wow. And so we're in a different place. And, everybody had to weather the storm. Everybody's coming through. And it's just, hey, and it's not just fishing, of course, it's everyone. And, it's just, in the perfect world, that wouldn't have happened to anyone. But, yeah, so, just adversity we had to deal with. And, you learn, survive, move on, get stronger, tidy up. Tighten the belt where you got to, and it's I think those things are good for any business every now and then. But hey, tough time, we're through it, and I hopefully we've seen the worst of this pandemic, and there's no more tournament cancellations. Who knows with it rising now? We have no idea. All we can do is go fishing. But the beauty of Major League Fishing, as you know, in this environment of mask and social distance, no gatherings more than 4, 5, or 6 people, whatever the protocols are, the most we'll ever have in a boat at any time is 3. We don't have meetings. You can stay socially distanced, and it was an amazing thing that we were able to continue on a little bit. We thought maybe we could push a little farther, but we did not. It probably wasn't the right thing to do at the time that decision was made. And so we do have the way our sport operates. It operates within a lot of these parameters for this coronavirus protocols. Fortunately, and that's unintended, but it is that way. And that is a light at the end of the tunnel, and a silver lining, I guess you could say, that has really helped us, moving forward and being able to present our sport as a viable sport going forward.
I agree, and I think too, just the fact that obviously we're outside, and all indications are that being outside is one of the best things for you during this pandemic. The vitamin D from the sun is tremendously good. It's what I'm reading.
UV light from the sun's supposed to kill the virus too. I mean, I've heard that. I mean, I don't know. There's just a lot better than being in a cubicle in a small room with a lot of people, and that's all we can say about that. Our work environment is pretty safe as far as all the protocols go.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. What do you think is the future of, number one, Major League Fishing, but then just in bass fishing in general? Do you see everybody brings this up. I know this is an original concept, but, there's the NBA, there's the PGA, there's NHL. For a guy that's not, I'm actually pretty impressed with myself because I'm not a sports guy. So I'm really surprised that I could remember all those. But do you know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, yeah, bass fishing is my sport. So, like, do you see this evolving eventually into one, bass fishing in general, the sport of bass fishing, into one organization, one professional organization? Or where do you think we're heading with the sport long term?
Well, I think if you look at other sports that have had some fragmentation or some different leagues or whatever, at some point in time, they have all consolidated or become one. That's very likely the future of the sport of bass fishing. I mean, who knows? But I just would say look to other sports and see how they've all end up, either they merge. I mean, who knows what happens? But that's kind of, I would say that's the most likely scenario in the future. But who knows? I have no idea.
Yeah, what I like to think about, we were talking about how we got into fishing, and I was addicted to the Bassmaster show with Bob Cobb. Whenever that show would come on, that's what. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but I have said this in the past, but I wasn't looking forward to church on Sundays. I was looking forward to the Bassmasters. And anytime, like, when Bob Cobb came on, he would, and just like he'd set up the John H. Kerr Reservoir on the border, and 44,000 acre John H. Kerr Reservoir, the battleground, and I was just like, he'd set it, like, he was such a wonderful storyteller, and I would just get all charged up, and that really was like the fuel that just powered my passion for bass fishing and really just set me. It's why I'm doing what I'm doing to this day, really. I mean, but right here is Bob Cobb. I don't know if you could see that. That's Bob awesome. Cobb. We did Randy White, who's the producer of Major League Fishing Bass Pro Tour. We used to work together at Wintercom, which got bought by the Outdoor Channel down in Tulsa. But Randy was the producer of a show called Bass Insider. Okay, and so he was working with. He was doing a shoot with Bob Cobb. And unfortunately, I couldn't do it. I had another commitment. So I'm like, dude. And so we'd get these sketches for this Bass Insider show from the illustrator of Bassmaster magazine. And we'd use these sketches in the show as like graphic elements within the show, but we could keep them. And so I kept this picture of Bob Cobb. I hope I'm explaining myself. So I kept this picture of Bob Cobb, and I said, Randy, please, when you're going on this shoot with Bob Cobb, have him sign this for me. And he had him sign it. It says, hey, Greg, you're a keeper. What does it say? You're a keeper. You're a keeper in my boat. Bass wishes, Bob Cobb. So that shows you how important the Bassmasters and Bob Cobb still is in my life, that I put it behind me right here. So
it's legendary.
He's legendary. He's a wonderful storyteller. And I think to myself, when I'm filming these Bass Pro Tour events and, talking with Randy, and I've told Randy this recently, I said, dude, there is a new crop of young anglers that you're growing here. You have no idea how many of me that you're creating. And how I've talked to Zona about this. Zona had the same experience with the Bassmasters. There's a new crop of young anglers that Major League Fishing is creating. And to me, it's exciting, even if it's just a small part on my end. It's exciting to be a part of that, because to me it's so healthy to have for something like this to just inspire young people,
It is, and I think that's one of the great things about our sport as well, is we have the passion for our sport. At the same time, everybody has a huge a desire to bring more people into our sport and share this thing that we love with other people. Take them fishing for the first time, especially kids. I've heard someone say in the past, off the streets and in the creeks, hey, take them fishing. Put them in a great environment outside that they don't have a chance to maybe it's not something that's cool to do or whatever. This makes it maybe more cool, especially with the high school fishing going on. What a great development is that. Hey, let's get outside. Let's enjoy this great outdoor space that we have in the United States of America and enjoy these resources that we have. And everyone in that you and I have been in the sport for a long time, welcome that with open arms. And it's very, very, very exciting to see that happen. And without even trying, you pay it forward, I guess you could say. You're always trying to nurture, find opportunities. If somebody, has something, that involves kids or maybe gets more people to explain how to go fishing. We have those kid fishing deals at our events. We had the same ones at Bassmaster. It's just a common theme through fishermen. Doesn't matter who you are. And it's interesting because I spoke at a bass camp at Lake Fork a couple weeks ago, right before we went up to Lake Champlain, and pretty much said the same thing. I said, hey, young men and young ladies. There were several lady anglers in there. Young women, high school fishing, same passion. They loved to be there. They were there for the whole week fishing with these guys in Lake Fork, catching big bass, just excited about the whole thing. And I said, hey, welcome to the family. One thing about fishermen is we're all fishermen. We all have the same passion. We all speak the same language. And it doesn't matter if you're 92 or 22 or 6. So that's the beautiful thing about our sport. And that's, I think, why we're so passionate, too, about our sport is because it's not just a sport. It's the outdoors. It's all these things we talk about. It's the big family, and I'd say brotherhood, but there's a lot of sisters in there, too. It's just the family of the sport of fishing. And it's not just the sport of bass fishing. It's the sport of fishing. But we have the niche of bass fishing. So that's what's so exciting and compelling and moving forward. And I think is just, I guess, why we're still so passionate about fishing.
Wonderfully said. Yeah, that was very well said. I couldn't agree more. Who, speaking of, the youth, who, like when you first started in bass fishing, who did you look up to? For me, I was a huge Rick Clunn fan. Huge Rick Clunn fan. I mean, I would watch those tournaments when he would battle out with Larry Nixon in the Megabucks, tournaments. And I love that it was like the Megabucks. What was it, like $40,000 was like,
No, I think it was actually like the first $100,000 ever. It was why it's Megabucks. Oh, but you're right. It might have only been 40, but I'm thinking it might have been 100. It's like huge.
So who
like $1 million today?
Yeah, no doubt. So who when you were starting out in your professional bass fishing career, who were you looking up to even before you made that jump? Who was the angler that was like your hero?
My all-time hero is Denny Brower, no question. My family friend that lived down the street that started taking me bass fishing when I was young, he was a jig fisherman. If he had 5 rods on deck, they were all 5 going to be a jig. So to me, it became cool. If you weren't throwing a jig, you didn't know how to fish, man. This 15-year-old kid think I know everything. Hey, man, who's going to throw a rattle trap? That's an idiot, but anybody can throw a rattle trap. I'm going to throw a jig, and I'm going to catch them on a jig. Well, that's just what I fished all the time, and that's what my mentor, Kendall Lovett from Waco, Texas, taught me how to fish a jig. And Denny Brower was and still is the jig master. He always won tournaments on a jig, killed everybody. Legendary in my eyes. And so I loved it. And Denny's a friend. And I have tremendous respect for Denny and what he's done in the sport. He's been on David Letterman, I think, 2 or 3 times. He did the stuff that we talk about. Hey, it'll never be the NASCAR. He was the first one to do some of that, national things that no one else still really has done that much of.
Well, he's on a box of Wheaties. I actually have it in my office over here.
Yeah. So Denny Brower, and I never will forget my first year on the it was called the Top 150. The first year I fished it, and then became the tour, and then it became the Elite Series. It was the same tour, just different names. But the first year I fished it was called the Bassmaster Top 150. And I remember seeing all of my legends walk around, the Guido Hibdens, the Browers, the Jay Ellises, the Rick Clunns, the Gary Kleins, on down the list. Van Dam. And I'll never forget the first time. And I got really fortunate, had some success early on in my career over there in the Bassmaster circuit. And I'll never forget when I ran into Denny Brower on the dock. And he looked, I never formally really ever met him. I said, yes, sir, Mr. Brower, or something the first time I ever saw him or whatever. But never forget the first time he looked at me and said, hey, Kelly, how are you doing? It's like, he knows my first name? You got to be kidding me. I couldn't believe it. And that was, I'll never forget that. I was like, Denny Brower knows my name. And that, to me, that was huge. And I had made the pro circuit and everything. And that's like I said, I guess the kids are still like that today that come up. I mean, maybe they are, but I was starstruck, still am, and I'm very fortunate to call these people friends, and I've met all of these heroes of mine, to this day. Have another story about Rick Clunn, too. I never really knew Rick very well at all, but of course knew who he was, and like I said, I was always real standoff. I was like, "Hello, Mr. Clunn," or if anybody walked by close. And my second year on the Bassmaster Tour, I won an event on Gunnersville, and Rick Clunn was fishing close to me. I mean, we could see each other all day, every day, and he didn't do very well, and I won the tournament. I was just on just the right deal, and I had the right little creek channel that came through. And we had an event the very next week in Beaver Lake, Arkansas. Never forget. We had fished both tours back then. And I was sitting at the pre-tournament meeting, and they used to feed you at those, and I had sat down at the table. This gentleman sat down next to me, and I looked, and it was Rick Clunn. Sat down next to me and said, "Hey, Kelly, congratulations on your tournament there." He's being who Rick Clunn is, the bass fishing guru of all time. He said, "So tell me about your tournament. How did you find the fish? How did it go down? What did you do? How did you figure out what was going on?" I said, "Well, here's what I did. I was tried a bunch of baits, this, that, and the other. Long story short, slow rolled a 3/4 ounce spinnerbait. That was before really anybody knew what a shad spawn was. We still didn't know what it was then, but I caught them on a spinnerbait in April, and nobody used to ever throw spinnerbaits in April. It's just kind of an interesting thing, but it was crazy, and that's the first conversation I ever had with Rick Clunn in my life too. So.
And it's interesting you bring that up because he's I think he's maybe in his early 70s now. I think that's right, and he's still such a student, of the sport. And I saw a Facebook. I just realized that he had a Facebook page, and so I followed him on Facebook yesterday or the day before.
Yeah, he's into it. I do too. Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, so he's like writing really long he's putting pretty long posts up on Facebook about kind of his thinking and the history of he's kind of the father of square bill crankbaits, like the RC. I mean, the RC series of crankbaits is like that's where everything came from, as far, right? Am I wrong?
Do you want me to tell you a story about that?
Yeah.
Okay. Start of the RC 1.5. This is how it happened. There was a Bassmaster Open Championship, I believe is what it was called, on Toledo Bend. Okay. And I don't remember what year this was. They all run together, but it's a long time ago. So anyway, I think Rick Clunn either won or got second. Can't remember, but he did really well. And he was using a Lucky Craft crankbait. It was the only really good square bill at the time. It was called our BDS series. I think he was throwing a BDS 3 or a BDS 2 or maybe both. And BDS, ironically, stood for Big Daddy Strike. And who's Big Daddy? Rick Clunn.
No kidding.
Rick Clunn. Mike Otten named it that. Big Daddy Strike after Rick Clunn, without using his name, because of course he's not sponsored, but it was an homage to Rick Clunn.
Oh, nice! I didn't know that.
And it's the BDS series, is Big Daddy Strike, Rick Clunn.
No kidding. That's very, very cool.
So and now you know what a BDS is.
Yeah, I had no idea.
BDS.
Does anybody is that are you dropping that knowledge here on Another Fishing Podcast? Has this ever been said before?
It may have, and nobody really got any traction on it, but that is where that came from. And that was Mike Otten, big fan of Rick Clunn and square billing, pretty much designed that bait and had it. And to my knowledge, Rick Clunn used it in that tournament and loved it. And either won or got second. He did fantastic. So let's go about 4, 5, or 6, 7 days after that event is over. It's in the fall, which is of course a great square bill time. I'm at my little house in Mineola, Texas, slow guiding in November or whenever, October, whenever it was, and the phone rings, and a couple times I pick it up, and cell phones weren't really going strong then.
It was a giant phone. It was like twice the size of your head.
It was a non-cell phone. Everybody didn't have. We had landlines. It was a landline, and I said, hello. He said, is this Kelly Jordon? I said, yes, this is Kelly. He said, hey, Kelly, this is Rick Clunn. I'm like, wow. Hey, Mr. Clunn, how are you doing? Mr. Clunn. I never called him Rick. That's the way I was raised. That's respect Mr. Clunn. Doesn't mean he's old. It means he's Mr. Clunn, right? Hello, Mr. Clunn. How are you doing? Hey. And he started talking to me about Lucky Craft and the baits. And he said, man, I really like the baits. It's awesome. He said, I have an idea. Let's go through, and we talked about it for a little while of how he could, maybe have a design or who he could talk to about designing, tweaking a little bit or whatever. But it wasn't that long of a conversation, but he wanted to direct to who we needed to talk to, which was the owner of Lucky Craft, the president of Lucky Craft. And so I directed him over there. And the next thing you know, you have a Bass Pro Shops exclusive bait. It was at first. The Rick Clunn series, the RC 1.5, sold exclusively through Bass Pro Shops.
No kidding, yeah.
Made by Lucky Craft. It was a Lucky Craft RC 1.5.
And what year was that? Because I worked at Bass Pro Shops between 2000 and 2004, and I think I remember
About
that.
10. Yeah, right in there. That was the start.
Okay. Yeah, no,
that was the start.
It's a legendary, that whole, I mean, when you think of like crankbaits and Rick Clunn, the pose when he first started, like
the best square bill, yeah.
I mean, those are legendary baits. You know what I mean? They'll forever be in the sport of bass fishing. I mean, they're always going to be known as legendary baits. Yeah, and
it's just groundbreaking and just set the whole stage. And again, Rick Clunn was at the nexus of that, I guess. And I got the phone call. I was like, hey, and then it went from there. And next thing you know, we have the RC 1.5, and I couldn't wait to get my hands on them too. And I had them before most everybody else, and I'm fishing them. And man, what a deal! And it was the tweaked Big Daddy Strike to Rick Clunn's had his own little deals, and that's where that is. That's what that is.
That's a really, really cool story. I appreciate you passing that on. I love this. This is why I wanted to start a podcast. I'm a big fan. This is essentially like I'm trying to rip off Joe Rogan here. There's nothing original about what I'm trying to do here. But I listen to Joe Rogan quite a bit, and I never really, until I started listening to Joe Rogan, I didn't really think that you could have conversations like this because everything's just like so polished, and everything's in traditional radio or just traditional TV. Everything's got to be okay in little time increments, and you got to say everything is this short amount of time, and then it's broken. Blah, blah, blah. Just a long-form conversation where, man, it's like you can really get into things and you can really start to kind of understand or get to know a person better, but then also the stories that you can get into, like these deep dives of stories that I think are so beautiful about this medium, this podcast. I mean, it's essentially it's radio, but podcasting allows you to be like, I don't care. I don't have to worry about worrying about a radio station that says I only have so much time. You can just let conversations, and obviously, I know you don't have forever here, Kelly, but you can have conversations just organically go down paths that they would have not necessarily gone down in other forms, other more strict kind of radio platforms or whatever. So this is exactly why I started this podcast and why I'm so excited to have you here. I know that your time is limited, but I did want to just get your talk. I wanted to pick your brain about Stage 6, the Stage 6 of the Bass Pro Tour. You did really well in that tournament. Just go through that event and because that was cool, man. The championship day, you actually helped me get to the angler that I was with in the morning. You provided kind of a taxi service to Brian Thrift, so much appreciated. But tell me about that tournament for you.
Well, hey, it was a blast. Champlain is one of the finest northern fisheries to me, and the reason that is because it has both species, smallmouth and largemouth, and you never know which one's going to be the biggest player. A lot of guys try to hedge their bets and go both ways. That can end with you strung out with one group of fish on the north end of the lake and one group of fish 86 miles away in the south end of the lake, and you can't fish both. So you kind of have to go in with an idea of how you're going to attack it. I had an open mind going in. I knew I was probably going to have to fish for smallmouth because, we all look at the previous events that had just come down the pipe and, the Toyota Series, and there was a Bassmaster before that, and there was several others. Largemouth didn't play in any of them, really, I don't think, very much. Bassmaster a little bit. But it wasn't the traditional what they do down there, which is go to Ticonderoga on the south end and flip grass, throw frogs, what have you. It's weird years, cold. The lake is 3 feet low. Which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is on that lake because I don't think many of us have ever seen it that low. It changed up how most of the stuff we used to fish or like to fish, because we've been there many times, was either out of the water or the fish weren't there. The grass was different. It was just a whole different place. So I went in, and we only have 2 days of practice, and I went in and tried some different things, and I fished for some smallmouth. I caught a few. It was pretty windy the first day. I wasn't able to go offshore too much. I tried a little bit. And I said, hey, okay, I'm going to go largemouth fishing. So my plan was first day up north, the north end of the lake, which is a huge area. And depending on how that went, I was going to go to Ticonderoga because I was pretty sure going into the event that I was just going to go to Ticonderoga. To heck with it, I'm going to fish my strinks, I'm going to fish grass, and I'm going to fish for largemouth bass. That was my plan. So I'm using the first day of practice to kind of eliminate the top of the lake. Caught a few smallmouth, ran around, did some different things. Started running around, seeing how the grass was different. Went to some areas I haven't fished in a long time. Went to some of the historic areas that typically have had the bass in them that were sleepers this year. Missisquoi Bay, always a huge player in events there. And it was strangely silent. I hadn't heard any intel out of that. You hadn't heard anybody say, hey, I won the tournament. I was, fishing Missisquoi Bay, whatever. And so me being an idiot, I went over there anyway, just to check it out, And I figured out why. The entire lake is grassed over milfoil. The entire lake, I say the lake, the big, it's just a big bay. And fished around, didn't really catch much, caught a few, threw a chatterbait a million times, caught a bunch of yellow perch, would follow it there every time, caught a couple bass here or there, went into the bank, flipped some reeds, did some different things. And I looked up and I saw a bunch of real thick, shallow grass and a bunch of pads. And there was a few boats around, but there is nobody fishing shallow. I don't know why that is. Well, I figured out, because I haven't really fished there much, it's about a foot deep for like a mile, okay, back to where all this stuff is. And so I guess that's why nobody was going back there. You couldn't really run in there or whatever. So I decided I'd spend the time and fish around. And I did. And I fished through it a bunch. I started seeing fish move. I thought they were pike, what have you. I never got a bite on anything. And I finally said, I'm going to tie on a frog. Let's try a frog. And let me tell you what, it was lights out real quick. And I thought they were pike because I got so many bites so quick. And I said, I'm going to set the hook on one. And I went ahead and set the hook, and it's 4-pounder. And I said, you got to be kidding me. Largemouth. And then so I shook off a couple more, went a little, ways farther, caught another good largemouth, shook a bunch off, had the bites, and I had located 2 areas that had a pretty good school of largemouth, I thought. I'm like, sweet. So how exciting is that? And I got back out of there as fast as I could because I'm in no man's land where I haven't seen anybody else. Yeah. So I got out of there. I went to practice some other stuff. The second day, I made the decision not to go to Ticonderoga because I really liked what I had found. So I went looking around again, and I found a fallback area, flipping some milfoil too, which I never fished in the tournament, but Brandon Coulter was fishing there and almost made the top. He finished 11th. So I was very fortunate. I found 2 strong schools of fish. And so I said, heck, I had to make a decision to go flipping the first day of the tournament or frogging. And I just made the decision. I said, I really like that frogging deal, and I didn't see anybody. Let me go do that. Never saw a boat all day. Had the fish on to be leading the day. Probably lost halfway the boat. I lost 6 good fish. Would have had 55 pounds or so probably. And that was awesome. I think I was squarely in the top 10. So then our next day, the second day of Group B, I went back and caught them really fast. Caught big bass of the day. I think I had a 5.9 on a frog, which is huge up north. Sounded like
that's a giant.
Sounded like a bomb hit the water. I cast my frog a long way. It hit the water, and about 1 second later, it go boom. And this is all, water this deep, and I'm having to drag it through pads and buggy whips, the cane. And
were those fish, so was that milfoil growing all the way to the bottom in that?
There was milfoil clumps, and there's some areas had more holes in it, and there was some stuff that looked like hydrilla. May have been LOD, I don't know what it was, but there was some hydrilla-looking stuff. There was some milfoil-looking stuff, and there was a lot of pads. And then there was the thick slime, the brown slime that typically you frog over, but I guess it was too shallow. I don't know. But I had a really good day and got the heck out. I actually tried to contend with Justin Lucas to try to win the round because I'd had the bites to lead the first day. Now, everybody loses fish, okay? But I said, man, I'm going to give it a run early. And I got within 8 pounds of him. I started the day, I think, 13 pounds behind him. I got within 8 pounds of him pretty quick, but then it started to be like a toe-to-toe deal. And I just made the decision just to not kill my fish to save them for the knockout round. So I backed out, made it into the knockout round. Go into the knockout round, and I was starting to really figure out how it was going down. I figured out how big the area was and that the schools were moving around. You had to move pretty fast to keep up with them. And I caught 56 or 58 pounds, whatever I had, squarely in the top 8, which had to be in the top 8 to make the championship round. So once I was in there pretty good, I actually backed off a little bit and practiced a couple times. I shook off 2 4-pounders on a frog late.
Wow.
And could not wait for the final. I mean, geez, haven't had a boat around me all week. I mean, it's like no man's land. I'm like, how does this happen? And everybody's smallmouth fishing. And I'm on them. I figured out how to catch them. And it wasn't easy. You had to pick, and I loved it because I love to fish grass. Fishing a frog is a lot like punching mats, which is my favorite way to catch bass. You got to read the grass and kind of see where they're going to be sitting. And it increases your chances immensely because there was just miles and miles of the same looking grass, and they were not everywhere. They're in a couple places.
Yeah, so go through that. Like, how are you? Because people that don't fish grass, I love to fish grass too. Like, I have no problem with it. But people, I remember I was in a bass club in Pennsylvania back in the day, and there was this little reservoir that had awesome grass in it. Man, I love fishing it. But there are people in the bass club, they're like, I can't stand that lake. There's too much grass everywhere. I'm like, what are you talking about? But it was because it was like, to them, it was like trying to find a needle in a haystack, So how do you break down, a big grass bed? Like, how are you picking that apart?
Well, so, we call it reading grass, I guess you could say. Even if you read grass perfectly and there's no bass there, you're still not going to catch one. So there has to be bass there too. But what reading grass helps you do is determine quickly if the bass are there, and then why they're there, where they are in that grass, and then how, when there's still a ton of it, you maximize your presentations to where you get enough bites to do well throughout the day. Because if you fished every inch of it, you probably wouldn't get near the bites. So it's high percentage stuff. Typically, you're looking for changes in the grass where different kind of grass come together or are in the same place. Holes in the grass or hard bottom, sand spots. That's one of the keys where I was fishing. It got to where it was clumpy. And I think the fish can move around easier than it just being thick as, all get out. Although that has its place as well, especially if it's closer to an open area. So, maybe the keys to breaking down are fish the absolute thickest parts of the grass bed you can find. That's the number one, pretty much all the time. Find the thickest areas that are closer to open areas. That's number two. And then find areas that have, maybe if there's thick, solid mat of grass everywhere, that it's clumpier and there's holes in the grass, or just, it might only be one area. That is a key too. Clumpy grass is big time. And without getting too deep into it, that's pretty much the easiest way that you look for. And you might find them in one of those three categories, or all three, or maybe one early in the day and one better later in the day, or there might even be different techniques on that. But that's how you put your bait in front of the most fish the quickest, and that's how you break it down. And then you go from there and see what you practice, what you find. But what I was frogging was the thickest groups of pads that had the most thick grass around them, and then those pads will shade and they make a hole typically. No light goes through the pads, so thick grass everywhere. Underneath the pads is a hole with a hard bottom underneath, and it's only 2 feet of water. You hit the pad, you see the pads move, you're like, ooh, there's one in there, and I'd slow it down, and the next thing you know, bam. And so fun, but, reading the edges, maybe where you see a little line of it come out, so maybe there's a subtle bottom contour as well. It's hard to think of much bottom contour in 2 feet or less of water, but there still is. So
Sure.
Ditches, just any irregularity, but the thickest areas, and then the more open area in the thicker areas, if that makes sense, and then edges and, depressions. I mean, that's just what you're looking for, just different stuff. And then keying on that, if you look real close, it's not all the same at all. There is all kind of diversity going on, even if it all looks the same if you look close.
So you get into you get in the top 8 in the knockout round, and so you make it to the championship round, and just so go through your championship day.
Well, I was so excited. I think I had the fish to contend to win. I really do. I was so excited. I couldn't wait to get out there, and everybody was sitting there. A couple of anglers were going to take out and drive to Ticonderoga. But, a lot of them had 5 or 10 rods out. I think your angler had 8 aside. I saw that. So you know what I did right before takeoff? I got one rod out. One rod. And I put it on the front deck, strapped it in.
You wanted everybody to see.
It was my new Duckett Pro Series 7-foot heavy action. The only one I had. With 50-pound braid on it, high speed, Duckett Paradigm reel, and a frog. And I strapped that baby in. That is the one. I had the one rod on the deck, baby. That's what I'm doing.
Right on.
And so there's not many times you can do that, but I was able to do it that day, and it was awesome. So I did it. I laid it right out there, one rod. So that was fun. So I did that. So I was so excited, and the wind. It was really windy. It was a lot windier than we thought it was going to be. As soon as we got around the break wall, I mean, there's monster waves coming in. Took a long time to get to where I was going, a lot longer than I thought. I only had maybe 3 or 4 minutes to sit down once I finally got there with an hour to run. So it took me 57 minutes to get there. That was tough. I started thinking, man, I'm not going to get there for Lions End. And, taking your time, but, it just was kind of crazy. I get in there, and this wind, I thought it was going to be great. I thought it would really screw up the smallmouth fishermen somewhat, make it hard to be on their stuff, which I think did happen. Marty Stone had called me the night before. He said, hey, have you noticed when you have a lot of wind, because we knew it was coming, with changing your water levels, it's a phenomenon that happens in Florida all the time. The wind will actually move your water. And if you're fishing on the leeward side, I guess you could say, in real shallow water, it can blow your water out. And we talked about that. I didn't think that would happen because I was on the north end of the fishery. I thought maybe if water comes up there, it'll come on in and fill this bay up. What I didn't really think about was, after it makes the hook around, it would have to come back into the wind to keep it high where I was fishing. You just don't know. I didn't really know, but I thought it might be a possibility. So long story short, we start fishing. I think Jacob Wheeler got up pretty good, pretty quick. Then I was fishing. I didn't start on them. It took me a little while to catch one. I just picked an area to start. They weren't there, so I'm fishing pretty fast. I started to get into them. I got within 8 pounds of the lead. And, later in the first period, I said, here we go. I'm feeling it. And the frog bite was best in the afternoon. I mean, I could not wait for that third period because that's when I lit them up. The other rounds, I mean, and backed off. I mean, it's piranhas. I mean, they are fired up. That water's warmed up. The brim are popping in the pads. You can hear them, flick, popping everywhere. I mean, it's just on. So excited. And got within 8 pounds. And it was tougher than I thought. And I didn't catch as many good fish, so many 3.5, or didn't catch a 4-pounder. But I said, hey, here we go. Then we start the second period, and it was a lot slower. And I could tell stuff was changing. I remember I was going slower, and I had to have my cameraman kind of come up. Still was not computing because I didn't think it would affect me, whatever. I think I only caught 3 scoreable bass in the whole second period and fell down to maybe third or fourth, and I was slowly falling. But nobody else was catching them great as well. And then the third period, I ran to another place of mine where I had kind of been saving and to catch them, and I got in there and turned my troll motor on, and my troll motor was dragging the bottom and kicking up mud where it had not been earlier.
So you basically that water, and I think that's called isn't that called a seiche? Like whenever the water is getting sucked out of an area, and then I think it's called a seiche or seiche or something, or it's basically like a tide that's driven by wind. Right, so that's what happened.
That sounds right. Yeah, I don't know, but it's like the tide going out. It is. So I could tell we lost our water, and I wasn't getting any bites, and there was no fish moving, because when I would get around them, the bass would spook off, and I'd slow. I mean, it was amazing. You could go half a mile and you wouldn't see one, and you'd get into them, and they're in a big loose school in the area. They do it in Florida all the time too. It doesn't really make sense, but they do. They loosely associate, and you can put this in the knockout round. I put my power pole down after not getting a bite for like 20 minutes. I put my power pole down and I caught 9 fish without moving.
Wow.
Just going down all this grass that looks the same. I just ran into them, and you got to recognize that and let it down. And I kept thinking I would run into that, but in the third period, I finally figured out. I said, "Hey man, I have lost my water," and all the fish. And so picture this giant bay that's not that deep. It's 9 feet deep in the middle, and the very middle of it has milfoil that comes up to within 2 feet of the surface. It's a huge,
Yeah.
They're all gone.
Yeah.
And I figured that out, and I was done. I was like, look at the camera. Hey, I'm mind blown, but of course I'm sure I went on live because I wouldn't catch anything. And it was I was so disappointed. Now, the weather got me just like it did some of those other smallmouth guys too. I just didn't think it would happen to me. And I had high expectations for the third period. And then when you finally know that you are done, and then it's got huge waves and you can't make it to where your other area is, there's no way. I mean, if I had taken off when I figured that out, I don't even think I would have got there and still had time to fish. That was a terrible feeling. And I ended up in 8th place. And fantastic finish. Loved it. I had the most awesome week ever. I had cuts all over my hands still. They're still healing right now. I had Band-Aids from Brady Line because I was trying to catch every fish, but they hit the carpet, Ended up breaking my best rod the last day because he had too much grass on him on like a 3.5 pounder. And he was almost going to hit the carpet. I pulled a little harder and snapped Excalibur, my 1 7-foot heavy rod. And I still grabbed the line and kept him off the ground. But I was like, man. And I had some friends tell me they were watching. They said, hey, when you broke that rod, we knew it was over for you. And I'm like, well, maybe that's what it was. But the water had most of it to do as well. But, it was fantastic. The frog I was using the end of the week, it was brand new. It was like a opaque frog instead of being brown with all those pretty markings. It's just, I want to keep that frog forever. It's just, I don't know how many bass I caught on that. The knockout round, I think I had 23 scoreable bass on a frog. Nice. And quit with, an hour and a half to go or so and shook some more off. And that's not counting the 115s that I caught. We had a 2-pound minimum. I caught at least 10 or 15 112s to 115s every day. That was frustrating as well, but I know everybody was doing that. So that's over 30 fish landed. And that's not counting the ones that had missed, pulled off, whatever. I mean, what are dreams made of in fishing for bass is throwing a frog all day and getting 40 bites on a frog. I mean, in a tournament. Are you kidding me?
Oh,
I caught a 5.9, so I know there's some big ones around, and a whole bunch of, 2.5 to 4 pounders. So man, a magical week. The wind got me in the end, and that was just disappointing because I didn't have any, I thought I would have had at least a good shot at finishing at least second, but maybe even one. But once I figured that out, hey, it's all gone, and that happens. That's fishing. And to be honest with you, I think I was more disappointed was because I just wanted to catch more fish on a frog. And it's just I almost stayed another day if it would have been calm to go back because it's the best frog bite I've ever been on a tournament in my life. It's fantastic.
And so
I had it on myself.
And you had it all to yourself. You
All
had
to
it
myself.
absolutely all to yourself. It's almost like the feeling when if you're eating up with fishing, you find a school of fish, you pattern them, or you're dialed into them. You feel like you've discovered sunken treasure, and no one else knows about it. You know what I mean?
Like looking around, hey, where? I don't want anybody to see.
Yeah, and but it's also those moments where it's surreal. It's so good that, especially if you have a lot of experience as a fisherman, this is fleeting. This isn't gonna, and you experience that on the last day where it's like the highs and lows, where it's like, oh crap, well, they're not acting like I had hoped they'd act. In the previous days, I wish they were behaving like that, or that spot had held up. But as a fisherman with experience, that those times when it's on fire, those are really special times, and you have to just immerse yourself in those experiences because that it can just tank at any time, but when they're happening, it's like you're in heaven. I mean, it's like this euphoric feeling. It's a drug, and we're all, you were talking earlier about, as fishermen, we can have all kinds of disagreements, but as fishermen, we know what that is. It's a commonality that we all have, and it brings us, it binds us together. So it's funny you recanting that story. Like, I know exactly what the hell you're talking about. Every fisherman does.
And backing you up what you said, I always tell people all the time, all of us fishermen, we have way more in common than we have differences.
That's exactly right.
So,
well, you've given me a ton of your time, and I really appreciate it, brother. I've always admired
thanks for having
you.
me on, Greg. This has been awesome too. Appreciate it, brother.
Oh, you bet.
Always great hanging out with the underdog.
Yes, yes. No, I've always enjoyed our conversation.
That's my pet name for you.
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, that's all good. It's you're not the only one that has that pet name for me. It's very common.
We love you, bro.
Yeah, love you too, man. But no, I've always enjoyed our conversations. You've always been very candid and just very friendly, and I feel very lucky to have you as a friend, and enjoyed this conversation very much.
Same here, brother.
I do want to end one question though. So this can be very quick, but tell me what you love most about being a professional tournament angler. Let's do the negative first. What's the hardest thing? What's the thing you like least about being a professional tournament angler, and what do you love the most about it?
Well, I have, family and kids. The hardest part is being away from home and the kids and the family. And, I've been able to bring them to a couple. I wish they could go to all of them, but they can't. And sometimes we have a couple in a row, and you're gone. I was gone for 2 weeks because it's 3 days there, 8-day event, 3 days home. That's a long time in the summertime of your kids. I mean, that's a lot. That's the hardest part to me.
And what do you love the most about it?
Well, like we talked about, the freedom. You're living the dream. You're on the road. You're getting to go fishing, thing we all love to do. Getting to see all these different lakes, travel the country, have some fantastic fishing, meet great people, have camaraderie with fellow anglers. All of us professional anglers, we're all pretty much buddies, and we'll tell stories like you and I are sitting around talking. I mean, we get all excited to hear about. I can't wait to hear how Jacob Wheeler, we talked to him briefly. He'll say, "Hey, man, here's how it went down, and this is what I was seeing on." It's just can't wait to hear that. That's just the seeing the whole country coast to coast. Like I said, I fished events from California to Florida to New York to South Dakota and everywhere in between. Seeing this great country, meeting lots of people, getting to fish, and the freedom to be on the road.
That's pretty darn great. All right. Well, there he is, my friend. I'm honored to call Kelly Jordon my friend, and congratulations on a tremendous tournament, dude. And I look forward to stage 7. Hopefully we'll be paired up. And again, dude, just really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Hey, thanks again for having me. This has been a lot of fun.